Hello and welcome to this special show on Rajya Sabha Television. I am Vishal Dhaiya. Now, the nation is celebrating Vijay Diwas to commemorate India's victory over Pakistan in the 1971 war. We've actually entered the Swarnim Vijay Varsh, that is 50th year of this victory. Now, this was a 14-day long war which was effectively won by India, and it resulted in the liberation of Bangladesh as well as the largest military surrender after the World War II. All three Indian armed forces, that is Indian Navy, Indian Air Force as well as Indian Army, played a stellar role and helped each other in securing this victory over Pakistan. Today, we're going to talk about what actually happened in those 14 days. We'll try and recount the memories from none other than the war veterans, those who were there on the ground, in the air, as well as in the water to fight this battle for us. We have with us three veterans from all three armed forces. I'll introduce them to you and we will hear from them only as to their version of the 1971 war. So let me first introduce the guests to you, beginning with retired Air Commodore Prashant Dikshit is with us from Indian Air Force. We also have with us retired Vice Admiral Raman Prem Sudan from Indian Navy and Major Chandrakant Singh from Indian Army. Welcome all of you gentlemen to Rajya Sabha Television. And let's begin with this simple but very important question. And let me start with you, Commodore Prashant Dikshit, to try and understand as to how did it all begin?
Well, most of us will look back to history and recall about General Manekshaw having gone to the Prime Minister and fixing a time when the Indian Armed Forces action ought to have taken place in then East Pakistan. But let me say, I was a part of a strategic reconnaissance squadron and we were busy even earlier. And I think our business of work started just alongside the MuktiBini, that is somewhere in April or May. And we were doing a lot of work inside. Much of it I am still not allowed to talk. I don't know why the constraints are put on me, but I do recall visiting there on the 9th of December over Cox's Bazar, Chittagong, Dhaka and back to Delhi. That was a very adventurous sortie, if I might say. Mm-hmm. You know, we took off from Guwahati and we were to cover these places and we have to go diving down and pulling up. We have to fly low as 400 feet AGL to avoid detection by then East Pakistani Air Force radars. And then I remember going down south, entering parts of now what is Myanmar, turning right, turning starboard sharp, and going to Cox's Bazar. And then we shot up to 10,000 feet, covered Cox's Bazar. We dived again, and we came in the vicinity of Chittagong, pulled up again to 10,000 feet above ground, and did a photo run. I have a very rewarding picture of that. I'm afraid I can't show you there. But I did see a lot of smoke. The Indian naval shipping, the naval destroyers and all were already there in the vicinity. In fact, my CEO, late Air Commodore Benigal, had told us that be careful, the naval aircraft are also there shooting at your targets where you're going. And then we pulled up. Again, after we came out of Chittagong, and we came straight to Dhaka. Kurmitola was the airfield. We did another photo run, and from there we set course for Palam. The Canberra PR-7 flying at flight level 360 for Palam. Those were winter days. There were a strong jet stream which we encountered. And we, whilst going when we had traveled at some 500 knots, on the return we were flying at 320 knots. Mm-hmm. As a result, Vishal, we got late landing at Palam, where we had to deliver those films which had to be processed for the next day's evaluation. Mm-hmm. And before we could land, we were declared a hostile aircraft. Oh, that was great adventure. We didn't know whether we would survive our own Indian Air Force, but fortunately, the air traffic controller who was sitting in the Palam ATC recognized one of us. And that was the thing. And when we suddenly went to first names and we did a landing, I'm sure people will recall. I remember the Chandrakant stories I've read elsewhere. And of course, the Admiral will must to share. May I now hand over this task to the others, please?
Okay, definitely. There are very, very interesting memories for everybody who's participated in this particular war. Let me bring in Major Chandrakant Singh here, since Commander Dixit spoke about that collaboration with MuktiBini. Major Chandrakant Singh, you were there on the Eastern Front and very closely involved with the collaboration which was there between the Indian armed forces as well as the MuktiBini. So if you could tell us more about it and the way this entire thing played out on the eastern border there.
First thing, what I want to say is that whether it's an interview on television or writing a book, anybody who's giving the interview or writing a book places himself at the center of the account, and it always comes out as if he won the war single-handedly. It's natural. Not only with us Indians, you read everywhere. This war, like all wars, was a cooperative effort. From the lowest cook, he did his bit, and you'll be surprised, there was a sitting member of parliament who took part in this war. Brigadier K.P. Singh Dev, AVSM. This is the certificate that was handed to him by the Lok Sabha Secretariat, saying that he was the only member of parliament to take part in the war. I'm saying this because it was a cooperative effort of everyone, including the civilians and the women back at home. My association with Bangladesh goes back to the 3rd of April. My battalion was located at a place called Sabroom, which is in southern Tripura, closest to Chittagong, which the Air Commodore mentioned. On the 3rd of April, Major Ziaur-Rehman, later General Ziaur-Rehman, Chief of the Army Staff, Bangladesh, and later President, husband of Khalida Zia, crossed over into our location. For 3 months, he stayed with us. Most of the time, he shared my tent, drank our whiskey, and he appeared to be a decent man. And along with him was another famous MuktiBini commander, who later on became a cabinet minister in it, Captain Rafiqul Islam. He was the head in Chittagong, or something called, not the head, he was the adjutant of the East Pakistan Civil Affairs Force. Major Zia was the second in command of our East Bengal regiment. He's the one who arrested all the Pakistani officers and shot them, and went on to Radio Chittagong and declared an open rebellion against the Pakistan army. Now that is the beginning of the armed struggle. It started off on the 25th or 26th of March. And on the 3rd, he had crossed over to India. For 1 more month, there was a lot of fighting all over Bangladesh, but most of the hard fighting, and that took place, was when the when the Pakistanis retaliated and they withdrew from Chittagong towards Tripura. The last battle, which was fought towards the end of April, I think 26th or 27th of April, which I witnessed, was the Battle of Ramgarh. Ramgarh is 50 meters away across the Feni River from the Indian town of Sabroom. By then, the Pakistanis, for all practical purposes, had cleared most of the armed struggle, which the rebels of the erstwhile Pakistan, Bengali rebels of the erstwhile Pakistan army had put up against them. It took them 1 month to clear them. Then the fate started off, but simultaneously, one of the most tragic incidents in the history of mankind took place. Was the mass migration of millions of refugees that came over. Tripura was the most affected because on 3 sides it was surrounded by East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. And the killing, rape, butchery of the local population started off.
Okay.
In the initial stages, the main targets were Hindus, but within 1 week or 2 weeks, the Pakistani army did not distinguish whether they were Bengali Muslims or Bengali Hindus. They were indulging in rape, loot, and plunder of the worst possible kind against whether they were co-religious, but they were different against the Bengalis. Gradually, when the things developed, by the end of May, when it was clear that about 10 million refugees had come over to India, and this burden was something that we could not bear, and that we would have to take a more active role, we started training the refugees and the escapees from East Pakistan to become soldiers and training them in guerrilla warfare and others. And this is no longer a secret.
Major Singh, that's a very interesting account of events which led to that day, that is 2nd of December, when the actual war started. And I'll come back to you on the role played by Indian Army there as well. You're there on the ground as well. Let me first bring in Vice Admiral Raman Prem Sudan here. Admiral Sudan, if we look at Indian Navy's role and the way it changed the entire sequence of the sort of scale of balance out there, if I must say, specifically on the Western Front there. So how would you look at, whatever happened during those 14 days? That's one part. And two, the strategy adopted by Indian Navy.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I feel very proud, that I was part of this, our armed forces during this fantastic military victory that the Indian Armed Forces achieved in 1971. I don't know if we are getting the recognition that it deserves or not, but for me, I think 1971 was the biggest military victory for the Indian Armed Forces. Having said that, I joined my ship, INS Kavarati, which is a Patia class, sort of a frigate, very powerful ship those days, in the month of July after completing my training. And by then, the war clouds were already over the horizon. And straight away, we were out at sea, working up with the fleet, which comprised mainly of the aircraft carrier INS Vikrant and 3-4 escort ships. Now, working up the carrier was very important because she was not fully operational. She had a problem with her speed because of the boilers. And as you all know, as you probably know or don't know, you need the full speed of the carrier to launch your aircraft with full load. Now, this was becoming a handicap. So you had to find the right wind at the right place and maneuver the ship and the fleet to enable the aircraft to take off with the full weight. Full load, yeah. So we were working up with Vikrant through the months of June, July, August, September, and then as it was appreciated, the war is approaching, and there was an apprehension that we may have one of the Pakistani submarines on this side looking for Vikrant, because Vikrant is a prize catch for any submarine or any navy. So I think it was later proved, rightly appreciated, that the Ghazi, PNS Ghazi, was prowling around in the Bay of Bengal trying to get a shot at the Vikrant. But I think we had a strategically very thoughtful admiral. We had deployed the carrier to the Andaman. And the carrier was nicely tucked away in the Andaman after her workup. It was fully worked up and she was tucked away in the Andaman in Port Cornwallis, in the northern Andaman, while other ships went about doing their own workup. Similarly, the preparations were going on the west coast. We had the missile boats, which were newly acquired from Russia, and they are normally used for a defensive operation to stop ship strike on the shores. But Indian Navy innovated and decided to use them as an offensive weapon. And they have handicap of range, endurance, and so their plan was to tow them off Karachi and let loose them. It's like guerrilla warfare, like the jungle warfare. And that is what exactly they did during the war. I'll just come back to the East Coast. Now, while the fleet was excising and resting in the Andamans, my own ship, Kavrati, had the first taste of blood. In the month of November, as you all know, during this phase, there were a lot of MuktiBini activities going on. There was covert support from our people, from our own divers and sailors and officers to support them in whatever endeavor they're doing. The idea was to make entry into East Pakistan as difficult for commercial activities as possible. So with that idea in mind, there was an operation planned to disrupt the shipping into Bangladesh, into East Pakistan. And I was fortunate to be the navigating officer of the ship Kavrati, which went into enemy waters in the month of November 10th, 11th, month before the war. Escorting two small boats. These are all there in book Operation X, so it's no longer a secret. We escorted two ships, two small boats, and went to Pusur River mouth. Pusur River is well inside East Pakistan, and these boats were asked to lay mines. They laid mines at the entrance to the harbor, to the entrance to the harbors of Chalna and Mogla, and it was, and the rest of the operation was done so discreetly as so stealthily that the Pakistan forces did not know anything about it. We were well into the waters. Of course, we had to take necessary precautions, hoodwink them by camouflage, etc. And we laid these mines, and these boats laid the mines, and we came to know later that they had blown up a couple of merchant ships, and we had achieved our aim. Aim of commercial activity into Pakistan harbor. Only Chittagong was left. Now, during the war, we sailed out from Visakhapatnam on the second night and effected meeting up with the fleet of Bangladesh, of East Pakistan on the fourth morning. And then the tamasha started. Little did we realize that we were leaving harbor on the second night. There was this submarine, PNS submarine, lying outside, waiting for Vikrant. Now, why was she outside Visakhapatnam? Because the C-in-C Admiral Krishnan had used deception to confuse the submarine and the Pakistan Navy. He made the communication intensity so high as to pretend that the Vikrant was sailing out from Visakhapatnam. And the enemy thought that this is a nice occasion to get to Vikrant. And she was lying in wait of Vizag. Unfortunately, our own patrols were there, and they were throwing depth charges, care charges, etc. And she met with their grave. Of course, we went and then met up with the fleet, and 4th morning onwards, the action started. It was so wonderful sight. The fighters and Elysees taking off in the morning towards Chittagong, Cox's Bazar, carrying their arsenal, and then keeping our fingers crossed till they came back. And the cheer that was heard at sea when the first of the aircraft came back, it was even louder when all of them came back. That was the first thing we had. Concurrently, while this operation was going on, the right hook was going on to the east, the left hook was going on in the west. Missile boat, as I mentioned earlier, were now poised to carry out the attack on the 4th. They carried out the attack on the 4th. That is why we celebrate Navy Day on the 4th of December. So it was 4th of December was a spectacular day for the Navy. We did the right hook by strike from the Vikrant aircraft, by sinking of Ghazi on the east, and the missile attack on Karachi and ships of Karachi on the left, on the west.
Indeed.
So that the sailed out after.
Indeed, definitely. It was a spectacular role played by the Indian Navy out there on both the fronts, the Western and the Eastern as well. Since you spoke about the coordinated efforts as well, and earlier Major Chandrakant Singh also brought that out. I'll go back to, Air Commodore Prashant Dikshit. Commodore Dikshit, in terms of, ensuring a coordinated attack, because that is what actually, won the war for us, all three of you here representing, all three armed forces, Indian armed forces. So from your perspective, Commodore Dikshit, how significant was this coordination between all three armed forces?
You are absolutely right, Vishal. The coordination between the three services and also the civil segments with Major Chandrakant mentioned about the BSF and the others was superb. And mind you, although our communication systems were not so hot as we have today, there was a methodology. But I think there are two examples of joint action which I must bring it to your notice, although much has been written about it. One was a drop in Tangier, where Indian Army was planning to drop a whole brigade strength, for which an extensive photographic reconnaissance work was done, and the pictures were made available to the formation engaging in the paradrop. And that is the particular segment which led into Dhaka approaching from north. The other thing which is quite memorable is which led to the surrender by the Pakistan Armed Forces was the attack on the Governor General's house.
Okay.
And for which the exact data was recovered by army formations and Air Force chaps working together to pinpoint that place. Because it was, although the general location of the Governor General's house was very well known, but you had to provide that data into 4-figure coordinates, which all military men will understand, and had to be provided to the MiG-21 squadron, which did the strike and hit on top of the dome. History would recall that it is that specific action which, broke the Pakistan Army's nerve, and the Governor General sitting there, who became a person of no standing down the line, had to ask his troops to surrender. Although today's newspapers are talking about then Captain Abhay Singh carrying the message of surrender to one of the cronies of the Pakistan general who was sitting there. His name immediately misses me. But it was all a joint exercise through and through, and people were learning who to go to the correct kind of idea and things. Several books have been written. I think Major General Kalyan Verma's book on crossing the Meghna is worth reading. General Bharat Kumar's book on the air action there. Mind you, over the last 50 odd years which have gone through, several very valiant attempts have been done to put the whole exercise together. But what we truly cannot miss is the role played by the Army Chief, Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw. And it was he who had envisioned the time and place where the armed actions ought to commence. And the times proved we were not in occupational force. We just wanted to make sure that the refugees went back to their homeland from where they had come into India, and to some extent to stop the massacre of the Bangladesh women which was taking place.
Since you spoke about earlier on the joint and the coordinated efforts out there, and we're running short of time, but let me have one final comment from Major Chandrakant Singh on Major Singh on the highlights of the Indian Army's role out there, because those were the boots on the ground there, and indeed it was a joint coordinated effort. But if you look at various operations conducted, the turning points and the highlights, quickly if you could sum up for us, Major Singh.
Okay. Firstly, I'll butt in for the Navy. The first major operation in East Bengal was conducted under the aegis of the Indian Navy, where under then Lieutenant Commander Ashok Kumar Roy, popularly known as Akku Roy, MuktiBini commandos went in and sunk 6 ships in Chittagong Harbour.
Okay.
Who was a friend of mine. When he exfiltrated with them, he came into my company area. He was arrested by my men because they thought he was a Pakistani. He was a tall, fair, handsome person, don't look like a Bengali. I think, but that's a different story. But unfortunately, Akku Roy lost his life on the 9th of December when they were searching for the bodies of the people who had gone down with Captain Mullah on INS Kukri.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the Air Force is concerned, the Air Commodore has mentioned, the first offensive operation done in East Bengal was not by the Indian Air Force, but under the aegis of the Indian Air Force, it was done by something called the Kilo Flight. It was Bangladeshi pilots in 2 Eluate helicopters and 1 Otter aircraft under Air Marshal Chandan Singh, then Group Captain Chandan Singh. I have actually written the biography of Air Marshal Chandan Singh, which should be out next week.
Okay.
Called Cavalier in the Sky. They were the first ones to carry out a night raid on Narayanganj fuel tanks, which they burnt.
Okay.
This is on the 3rd December. As far as the Army's actions are concerned, it's too short a time. The major action, and it is one of the greatest joint actions and battles of any in the history of warfare of any country, was the crossing of the Meghna River on the 9th of December.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this operation was carried out thanks to the coordination and mutual bonding by 2 legendary commanders, Lieutenant General Sagat Singh in the Army, and then Group Captain Chandan Singh, who was commanding the Air Force elements there, which was helicopters, 110 and 104 helicopter units.
Okay.
Sagat Singh had permission, and that permission was he had to get prior section from Army headquarters to lift 1 company of troops, that is 120 men only. They lifted these 2 helicopter squadrons and those young pilots, a total of 14 of them, lifted 6,000 Indian troops, infantry, across the Meghna between the 9th and the 14th of December. An operation of that scale has never been attempted by any army. I was fortunate, by draw of the luck. I was in the first helicopter, piloted by then Flight Lieutenant Pushp Ved, to cross the Meghna from Baria and land in Raipura. Group Captain Chandan Singh was also sitting in the hold of the aircraft. This operation started on the 9th of December at 4 o'clock, ended at 10th of December at 4 in the morning. On the 10th of December, that is 5 hours after this operation, Pakistan sent out an appeal to the United Nations for a ceasefire. For all practical purposes, effective fighting was over. There were no Pakistani major troops between where we landed and in Dhaka.
Okay. We'll have to leave it there, Major Singh, and thank you so much for your views, all 3 of you, Air Commodore Prashant Dikshit and Vice Admiral Sudan as well. Indeed, all of you are war heroes there, and those others as well who fought alongside with you in the 1971 war, as the nation celebrates the commemoration of this particular victory as Vijay Diwas, and we enter into Swarnim Vijay Varsh. We'll come back again on Rajya Sabha television. Till then, keep watching.